Welcome back to the podcast that is meant for anybody in theory, but in execution won't be for everybody. It is a busy, busy month in June. We've got Pride Month, we've got Caribbean Heritage Month. Yes, 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 yes. And later in the month will be the celebration of Juneteenth. A lot going on, but we are here for episode 3, which will be focused on Israel and Zionism. Now let's get into today's fresh kicks, shall we? And let's see what's going on in my life. Well, firstly, episode 2 is out. It was a three-part interview that I did with my mentor, Dr. Layla Brown. Now, because the team is me, when I make a mistake, the whole team makes a mistake. And so the audio was there, video was not there. My bad. So take a listen to that three-part interview where we talked about what's going on in Venezuela and Cuba. I had a great time with that. We'll have to get Dr. Brown back on when I know what I'm doing. Speaking of what I'm doing, I am trying to manage being a student worker during the summertime so I can graduate in December. So I'm trying to make it out here, y'all. But the one thing that's been keeping me going is working on this episode, episode 3. And I've also been doing some work on episode 4 because those two tie in together. So that's what's going on. Those are the fresh kicks. Let's go ahead and lace them up. There is a lot going on in these here 50 United States. We've got a lot of gerrymandering going on, which I took notice last summer when it became clear that in relatively short time, let's think about this. Last summer was like 6 months after the inauguration. Anyone who was paying attention to Donald Trump's campaign knew that once he won, things would be turned to a tailspin and the Republican congressional control would be up in the air. Donald Trump knew that, and that's when this whole gerrymandering stuff started around the state of Texas. Democrat elections, victories occur, and now Democrats are doing gerrymandering. So we've got a lot of gerrymandering happening all over the country. Seems to be no matter the coast, no matter the region, there's gerrymandering going on. So it seems as though the power we have as voters to decide who gets to the House, because that's the main concern, is who gets to control the House, right? We should be controlling that. And it seems like we are being told by default who's going to control our district and therefore who's going to control the House. And when you think about the next thing, which was the Supreme Court decision on the Voting Rights Act, which primarily gutted Section 2, which protected minority voters, when that decision came out, it really, really amplified the gerrymandering that's been going on. And it is quite interesting, the wording on the decision to try and make it sound not racial, even though this is a very racially driven decision. And it is suspect timing because of the fact that primaries are going on in the South, and now you have certain districts either that were drawn and they're going to count or they're not going to count. It's a mess, child. It's a ghetto mess over here. So I'm going to try and cover that in a future episode, the Voting Rights Act decision and what that is going to mean for 2026 election. Um, there's always an election, so this will affect 2026, 2027, and the big one in 2028. So we'll cover that in a future episode. And moving further north, because the decision of the Supreme Court really affects the South, moving up north to New Jersey, there is an ICE facility in New Jersey, Newark, New Jersey, called Delaney Hall. On the inside is a labor strike that's taking place. There's a labor and a hunger strike because, among other things, the detainees are victims of spoiled food, if they're given food at all, as well as just insufficient medical care, so not receiving the medications that they need. ICE will get a future episode, much like the Voting Rights Act will get a future episode, but I just want to make something abundantly clear. Our politicians deliberately call undocumented immigrants illegals because they want to make it seem as though being undocumented is a crime. I deliberately used the phrase undocumented immigrant because there is no crime that you can be charged with for being in the United States undocumented. You don't go to criminal court for being undocumented. You go to immigration court. And the issue with that is, as you can imagine, the backlog of cases due to the short pool of judges in comparison to the wide array of people looking to get citizenship. So the phrasing of illegals does not fit because there is no crime. The issue in that is that we in America believe that once you commit a crime and you go to jail, somehow that overrides any label of humanity that we could give you, and so you deserve subpar treatment. So most people probably wouldn't, let me be careful when I say most people. There are a lot of people who are not concerned with what is happening to those who are in prisons and those who are in immigration uh, detention centers because both camps get viewed as criminals and therefore criminals don't deserve humane treatment. And that is the view of a lot of people in this country, and it's very, very concerning. Um, like I said, ICE will get a future episode in the next couple months. But I just want to bring attention to what's going on in these United States and the global north and in the global south. There is concern about the spread of Ebola. We don't need to fearmonger and start thinking about travel bans and start thinking about pandemics and global closures, but the main thing is spreading awareness because there is not enough medical support on the ground in the Congo and in the surrounding countries and areas. So trying to control the spread gets hard when awareness is not as prevalent as it should be. So it's not to fearmonger, just to help spread awareness so that the people in the Congo can get their help. And that being said, let's go ahead and get our steps in with our main story on Israel and Zionism. Now, as I've said, this episode here really ties into what will happen on episode 4, in which I will do my best to lay out the relationship between America, Iran, and Israel to try and then explain how this armed conflict, this unchecked murder that's been going on, has really manifested to this point. Because let's think about it. The strikes happened on the 20th of February. So that means all 31 days of March, days of April. So 31 and 30 makes 61. Then you've got the 31 days of May. So that's 92 days. And then today is June 2nd. So let's just say 94. 94 days of this armed conflict and unchecked murder. And I don't say war because remember the Constitution. Remember that document? That one that says Congress is supposed to vote and declare war? Yeah, since that hasn't happened, I don't call this a war. I call this unchecked murder and armed conflict. That's going to be episode 4. But to understand that, we need episode 3, and we need to look at Israel. Now, I will tell you in advance, trying to explain Zionism as a non-Zionist is a difficult task. Trying to explain Israel's history as a Zionist is a difficult task because some people choose to start with the Torah origin or the Old Testament origin, and then you have some who start with modern history. For the sake of ease, I'm going to start with modern history, and modern meaning in the age of the telephone. So we're going to look uh, at first what Zionism is. And there are two ways of thinking about it. You can think about it from the perspective of those who were trying to get Israel established, and then those who are trying to maintain its establishment. So Zionism pre-Israel was this push to get Israel to exist in the first place, right? To get a Jewish homeland, to get a place for Jewish people to be sovereign, self-determinate, all that good stuff. What's happened here recently, as far as being a Zionist is concerned, is the belief that that land should continue to exist, be maintained, and that the people there have a right to, as our politicians say, a right to defend themselves. The reason I'm not a Zionist is because in the midst of all that, which we'll get to in a second, to create a country, you have to revoke the land from the people who already live there and exist. And because the world has always been this way, that land seizure, that land removal happens usually with armed conflict, lots of bloodshed, lots of murder. hmm And what ends up happening is victimhood gets weaponized to justify the genocide and the murder. Part of why I am not a Zionist is because, and I'm going to get into this in a second, but a lot of the leaders in Israel point to any attack on Israeli policy, any attack on the Israeli leaders, any attack at all, any accountability really is what it is. Holding them accountable is the same thing as anti-Semitism in their minds, and therefore, if you're anti-Semitic, you are Hitler-esque in your mode of operation. And it is that weaponization of the genocide that did very much occur in the Holocaust, that weaponization of that victimhood to try and then justify the genocide being inflicted upon Palestinians every single day. That really, really turns me off. And there is this white supremacist attitude that Israel embodies because if we think about it for a second, do you remember another country that has its origins in taking land from native people? And then when they realized the native people didn't really like having their land taken away, they chose to kill the native people. If that sounds loosely familiar to you, then you'll understand why I'm not a Zionist. And though it is so easy to be pointed by people and pointed at people and have them tell you, oh, you're anti-Semitic because you are not a Zionist, that is not true. And I blame Britain for this, as I do for most things, but I definitely blame Britain for this. And let's talk about let's talk about why. Why is Britain at fault? Britain is at fault because after World War One, Ottoman Empire fell to the Allied powers, and then Britain ends up in control of Palestine and Jordan. And there's this British mandate for Palestine in which the League of Nations says, all right, British government, you need to create a homeland for the Jewish people. That's just what you need to do, and you need to do it in Palestine. That's who you need to do it for, and that's where. So this is post-World War One. It's not until 1948 that Britain actually does what the mandate told them to do. Because Britain had to not only create this homeland, but then the League of Nations puts this caveat on it where it says you need to not infringe upon the religious rights and the civil rights of the non-Jewish people, i.e., in the creation of this homeland, which also means taking the land away from the people, I need you to also not infringe upon the rights of the people already existing there. And so Britain, it took them 25 years to try and figure this out more or less. The mandate was in effect from September 29th, 1923 until May 15th, 1948. So 1948 is when we have Israel get created by way of a United Nations vote. Resolution 181, also known as the partition plan for Palestine, and there was actually a committee on this on Palestine, and they drafted this resolution in September 1947, and then in November 1947, the General Assembly, so countries not in the committee, but the whole membership decides to adopt the resolution. So I'm looking over here because these are where my stats are, and I'm going to try and break down how the land was to be divided. So, the Arab state, Palestine, was supposed to have 42.88% of the existing land. The Jewish state was supposed to receive 56.47% of the existing land. And then Jerusalem, which they didn't really know what they wanted to do with Jerusalem. Jerusalem was supposed to economically link the two states, but then be independent and then have other countries oversee it. It was a whole mess. But Jerusalem was supposed to receive 0.65% of the existing land. So Not only are Palestinians told, okay, all of your country is no longer all of yours. We're not even going to give you a 50-50 split. We're going to give you 42.88. We're going to give you 43% of the land you have. We're going to take away 57% of the land. You cool with losing 57% of the land that you used to have? No, they were not. 33 countries voted favorably. There were 10 abstentions and then 13 unfavorable votes. Um, You can probably envision in your mind how those votes went. Of course, the global northern powers voted in the affirmative, and then they used their power and influence to get global southern countries to then join them to get the votes. The most of the unfavorable votes came from West Asia, also known as the Middle East. Of course, Palestine was not in favor of this, and neither was Iran. We'll come back to that. Foreshadowing. Foreshadowing. We'll come back to that. Uh, so then, 1948, war breaks out. Because, like I said, imagine being told you're only going to keep, if we round up, 43% of the land that you've always had. You're only going to keep 43%. We're taking 57% away from you. Civil war breaks out, and what ends up happening is the Palestinians who used to live in what was going to become Israel are now displaced with absolutely nowhere to go. Because it's not like you get to stay here because you've always been here. It's like, no, you got to go because this is Israel now, and you're not Jewish. I don't know how they fact check that because there's more than one way to exist in a Jewish body. There's more than one way to exist in an Israeli body. So if I'm thinking back to 1948, it was pretty much, do you look like this? Do you look like this? How close are you to either one of these things? And then we'll decide what you are and who you are and where you can live. Does that does that sound familiar to anything to you? Food for thought. So speaking of countries that go together real bad, um, Israel and America have a really, really tight relationship. And unsurprisingly, United States was the first country to recognize Israel. This happened on May 14th, 1948. And if you think about Israel, they receive the most amount of foreign aid of any country from the United States. Cumulatively speaking, Israel receives the most of that aid. And really, what America is doing is they are paying for influence. No country in West Asia wants to rock with America as much or as bad or as deep as Israel does. And so America pays them for that. They thank them for it. Now, what American politicians say is that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, but really all that means is Israel is the only country willing to do their bidding. And it has been this way since really a lot of our lifetime. And then more decades before that. Now, what used to happen was people believed that if I elect a president, right, they will bring in new policies, which, okay, sure, but what's definitely obvious and blatant is that Israel is the one policy that every president I can think of, especially since the 60s, that relationship, maintaining that foreign aid for that, that has linked every president together since LBJ. I have never seen a president say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to give Israel less money. If anything, it seems like every time there's a new president, Israel gets more money because of the desire to have more say, more influence in West Asia. And this idea of linking the two nations so strongly really came about in 1967 when the Six Days War happens. The UN drafts another resolution. This is Resolution 242, in which the Arab nations were to take their military presence away from Israel and then sign a bunch of peace treaties. And so the United States, of course, backs this. And what ends up happening from that is this fervor of Israel and Jewishness being so intricately linked. You know, beforehand, it was kind of like All right, we want a Jewish homeland, want a Jewish state. Let's do it. But after that, especially if you are Jewish American, watching America fight so hard for Israel and this Jewish state and and justify the defense of it via armed conflict really made people feel like part of my Jewish identity is this country. And so for the last 59, almost 60 years, those two things, Israel and being Jewish, have been so linked that it seems that for a lot of Zionists, if you attack Israel, you are then attacking Jewish people, and you are therefore anti-Semitic in your attack. And again, it is that weaponization of victimhood from a very real, traumatic, genocidal event that really, really turns me off. Um, like I said, back to Iran for a moment. Iran and Israel, they they go back and forth. So, like I said, Iran voted against the creation of Israel, as did most countries in West Asia. However, after the coup happens and there is an ouster of the elected prime minister so that there can then be this global northern supporter, diehard Shah who gets put in place. The Shah then brings about positive relations between Israel. So you've got 25-ish years of good relations from 1953 to 1979. That is the year of the Iranian Revolution. Iran, in the midst of all this, is the second Muslim majority country to recognize Israel behind Turkey. And then you can kind of describe the relationship between Iran and Israel as cold peace. So they're not really doing anything to be benevolent. They're just not really fighting each other. They're not opposed in armed conflict. So it's not, it's the opposite of Cold War, where there's tension, but there's no conflict. Here, it's there's no tension, there's no conflict. We just coexist. And then when Iran and Iraq are at odds, Israel actually starts to back Iran in that. And so there seems to be this allyship that exists. The allyship ended once the Iraqis were defeated in the Gulf War. And then once the Soviet Union fell and every enemy kind of went away for a little bit and everything got set in the early 90s, it was, oh yeah, we hate you. Remember when, remember when, remember? Let's run it back. And so we've been watching them run it back for the last 35 years. So that is a very rushed, condensed, whatever you want to call it, view of Israel, how it has linked with the United States, a little bit of Iran in there, a little bit of Zionism. And again, I'm not a Zionist. I ain't gonna be a Zionist, won't be a Zionist. Um, Fun fact, and then I'll move on in a second. Most black people were very sympathetic to Israel and Israelis, because they believed that, much like Africa, people who were displaced should have a homeland. And it was that thing that linked. The shift became when it was one looked at the votes and who who didn't want it and why. And then to watch Israel just start attacking people. And the unprovoked attacks especially was a really big turnoff for a lot of black allies, and it became, you are actually the embodiment of white supremacy. You are the United States. You're like a baby US, and you're just going around using your influence and your allies to then inflict pain upon Native people, people of color, the people who were there. And it's just a prolonged, unprovoked attack for what? So once it became, oh, this isn't just about having a land, this is about dominating and getting people to live how you want them to and forcing them to live, beneath your will. And it was like, yeah, we're really rocking with that. And so that is really where this alliance came in between Palestinians and black people of not just America, but just all over in the African diaspora. And you really saw that here in America when the Black Lives Matter movement happened in 2020. You remember when America liked black people for like 5 minutes during COVID? Yeah, Palestinians, they've always been rocking with us. And you could really see that alliance in the murals that Palestinians did. And that alliance really stemmed in the 60s. So once it became clear what Zionism was in the 60s, people had an easier time deciding where on the fence they lie and where on the fence they exist. And I will do my best to lay out in a clear way the relationships between those three countries. Again, it will be modern history and it will be a very rush and abridged version. So I encourage you to do a little bit of your own research. I will link the sources that I use to craft this so that you can take a deeper read and perhaps find some different sources for yourself. But after all that, ooh child, let's kick up our feet. So speaking of Native people, in the state of Washington, a man by the name of Gary, last name I will try to pronounce. I'm gonna spell it first, and you can see if you will pronounce it the way I'm about to do it. Verbrugge. My spirit says Verbruge. My spirit yesterday said Verbrugge. We're gonna go with the spirit of today, Verbruge. He's a 72-year-old man who lives alone, and he's decided to take the land that his family owns and give it to the Kalispel tribe. Imagine that. Now, granted, this man's doing a nice thing, but imagine that for a second. A native person, here's this land. You want it? You want this land? Yeah. I mean, it was mine until y'all came and did. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Since 2007, Verbruge, yes, that's today's spirit, has partnered with the Inland Northwest Land Conservancy to turn land that has owned by his family into a conservation easement. The land is being given again to the Kalispel tribe. It is home to elk, deer, moose, geese, bobcats, and many other creatures. Gary was just rocking with them, I guess, but he given them back. And the natives have vowed to keep the land in good health and with gratitude. So, you know, Gary, we thank you. We need more Garys out there, more people to be like Gary and be like, hey, here's Lango. It's back. It's back. But anyway, I am back. I am here. It's good to be with y'all today. Thank you so much for making me a small part of your day. Episode 4 will be an extension of this one where I will do my best. Lord, give me the strength to try and talk about Iran, America, and Israel, their history, and how it has led to these 94 days of what in the world is going on and why. Remember that your presence is protest, and the joy that you exhibit is the armor that will keep you protected. Thank you for being here. See you next time. Bye bye.